Welcome to the second half of the New Deal lecture, lecture 24, part 2. In this section of the lecture, we're going to look at New Deal programs by name. So we'll delve into the alphabet soup of the things that FDR tried to do to help improve Americans' lives during the Great Depression. And then we will construct a chart of those together. One of the hardest hit groups in the Great Depression is farmers, and that's a group that had been suffering throughout the 20s with 435,000 farm foreclosures by the end of the 20s. So helping farmers became a really core part of the New Deal programs. There is, of course, a lot of them that we could point to as ways that we're trying to help farmers. But the most important would be the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. The idea behind the AAA was overproduction. It's the age-old problem that even the populists couldn't really adequately deal with back in the 1890s. Farmers produced too much, and when you produce too much, prices go down. The AAA tried to tackle this problem by actually paying farmers not to produce. The goal was, if we keep you from producing, then prices will go up because supply will be low. Farmers who had already produced were encouraged to destroy crops. So you can see guys in the picture here are pouring out milk, which must have seemed shameful and wasteful to them. Other farmers butchered piglets, let fruit rot in their orchards, with the goal of lowering the amount of production so that prices would go up. The payment given to the farmers who weren't producing came from a tax on processors of food. So if you grew peaches, the person who processed those peaches into canned peaches paid a tax on that. And that tax then would be paid to, in the form of a subsidy, to a farmer who was told not to grow peaches, or whatever it happens to be that they're growing. This was controversial, as it meant one group in the American economy was being taxed for the benefit of another group. So this went to court. The Supreme Court declared the AAA unconstitutional in 1935, but it was later passed without this controversial tax on the processors of food, so that they wouldn't run afoul of the courts again. Other laws address the Dust Bowl victims. The Farm Resettlement Administration, for example, moved people out of the hardest hit areas of the Dust Bowl. There were other laws designed to stabilize problems, to deal with problems and stabilize the economy for farmers. So clearly the New Deal is looking at agriculture as a key component of the American economy that needs to be fixed. And in many ways, they're looking back towards what the populists had wanted in the 1890s, more government regulation for the benefit of the farming community. The lawsuits that bedeviled the AAA are pilloried, mocked in this particular cartoon, and eventually resulted in the declaration that the AAA was unconstitutional. Advertising for the New Deal tried to emphasize that America had plenty of food and that no one need go hungry, even though we were actually destroying food in order to raise prices. These posters indicated the help given to the Dust Bowl victims through the Resettlement Administration, which moved them to new places that had outside of the Dust Bowl. The industrial economy also needed to be spurred and gotten back into full shape. And the chief law designed to do this was the NRA, or actually the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act, which created the National Recovery Administration, or the NRA. And you will see NRA more commonly referred to, since each New Deal law often created an agency to oversee it. So there'll be an act, and then there'll be an administration to go along with the act. The NRA, the NRIA, the law creating the NRA, helped to make a system-wide effort at regulating industrial production. And it gave the executive branch the power to draft codes for prices, so what will be charged for goods, to set wages and working hours. So the presidential authority over the economy is greatly extended by the NIRA, as the executive branch can directly meddle in the production of certain goods. They released code books with all of these rules for prices, wages, and working hours. So about 10,000 pages total of code books. It was very unpopular, mostly unsuccessful, and in fact, industrial production went down under the NRA. In 1935, the Supreme Court declared the NRA unconstitutional. So we will see other laws come about later that will deal with wages and hours. It just won't be through this now dead program, the NRA. The NRA was one of the most heavily advertised of the New Deal programs. The New Deal, in good progressive fashion, used propaganda, just like had been used during World War I, to sell itself, to sell its programs. And for the NRA, the symbol chosen was a blue eagle. So notice it's got a gear and lightning bolts. We're going to get America producing again. And the eagle, America, this is a symbol of American power and strength. And that blue eagle showed up everywhere in posters, statuettes, even these bikini-clad bathing beauties with the blue eagle painted on their backs, you know, to give the National Recovery Administration a little bit of sex appeal. Just shows how much propaganda and advertising was seen as essential to selling government programs to support recovering the economy. In terms of helping the people who were unemployed, a lot of the New Deal programs created jobs, or as I've often said, gerbs, you know, throwback to South Park. These gerbs that were lost during the Depression would be given by the federal government in the form of all kinds of public projects, building projects, construction projects. Later on, we'll see artistic projects, music projects, writing projects. So these welfare-focused programs were designed to give people something to do temporarily, give them some employment. And honestly, many of them dealt with the psychological needs of Americans who simply said, I just want to work. Many Americans were not looking for a handout. They did not want the federal government to give them a check. They actually wanted to work. It was important psychologically for them to be doing something, to feel like they were productive and that they were helping their families. So FIRA is an example of one of these. Work, building, and repairing job-giving programs. The Civilian Conservation Corps is another example, but a very specific and special example where 18 to 25-year-old boys, men, were taken to the outdoors and they did outdoor sort of environmentally focused projects, building trails, stabilizing eroded areas, working in the wilderness to build roads. In numbers of wilderness places in America, there are old CCC camps and CCC access roads where these guys went out and worked and camped. So you had to like camping in the woods. In many ways, the CCC is probably the most popular of the New Deal programs. Young guys out there having a good time with each other, working. They're getting paid. Money is being sent back to their families. They remember this one pretty fondly, you know, creating all kinds of ways to entertain themselves, having pageants and dances and things. It is all guys, so this is a very, what we would call a homosocial environment. And it is also segregated, so the African American CC camps are separate from white ones. Then there's the Civil Works Administration, the CWA, the PWA, Public Works Administration, is another example of putting people back to work, building things. They built roads, swimming pools, hospitals, all kinds of public building projects. Here are CCC boys out in the woods working. You can see here one element of the Depression in the 40s, the oversized pants. The dungarees are pretty big, rolled cuffs at the bottom. Getting their fitness on as they build muscle, working out in the woods. Very popular program, probably the most popular of all the New Deal programs. It was an opportunity for young men to go and play and work and make some money in the CCC. But the PWA and the CWA and FERA also provided work for people. Some of these programs even provided work for women. Many women got ignored by New Deal programs, and that was particularly bad if you were a single working woman or a single mother and you needed to provide for your family going into the Depression. The economic collapse, of course, put you at risk since many times jobs were prioritized for men. So here we see women being given typing jobs, clerical work. Probably one of the most controversial and also long-lasting of the New Deal programs is the TVA. TVA is still in existence. The Tennessee Valley Authority was a giant hydroelectric dam building project. What they would do is build dams for hydroelectric power, and then it would sell electricity in the South, particularly Tennessee, Western North Carolina. And by doing this, it would provide electricity for people at particularly good rates, which means the government is owning a means of production here, which essentially means that TVA is a form of socialism. So we can sort of harken back to the progressives and the height of socialism and the progressive movement. Very controversial, very much attacked, sued, but actually did not get declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. It was controversial because it competed with private companies. So if you were a private electric producer, you now had government-provided electricity as your competition. It was also controversial because it displaced people. Building these dams meant that entire communities would have to be moved as mountain areas were flooded to make the dams. And so at the bottoms of many of the lakes created today are the remains of former homes and communities where people once lived in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. So it was not widely praised and accepted, but in fact survived and is still going today. You can see here the TVA dams. My home area is down here in Western North Carolina. This is where I was born, and then where I went to school. The dams, you can see in Western North Carolina, would create huge lakes. The lakes would then provide electricity. But today they're also very popular for recreation. So people use them for boating and swimming and fishing. So one of the things that we had to do with our study of these programs is to categorize many of the New Deal programs as reform, relief, or recovery. And so I had you work on a chart of these categories, and now I will reveal the answers. The AAA would be a recovery program. By reducing crop production to increase prices, by giving farmers more income, it can get the economy going. It's designed to spur the economy by helping out one section of the economy, farming. The CCC, what do you say? Is it reform, relief, or recovery? Survey says relief. By giving young men jobs and giving money to their families, it is providing money to help people survive the Depression. How about the TVA? Reform, relief, recovery. It's recovery. The electricity generated would encourage consumption, so we'll provide cheap electricity for people. It would encourage industrial growth. They did conservation projects to help farmers. There is a sub-goal of relief because as you're building the dams, you have to hire people, and that means providing jobs for people to build these hydroelectric plants. What about the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act? It's got recovery in the name. It's a regulation of business activity designed to get the economy moving through industrial codes and protecting labor by protecting wages and hours. So it's supposed to get the economy rolling. Sadly, it didn't. The REA, the Rural Electrification Act, that's recovery. The goal of that is to provide electricity to rural areas. If they have electricity, they will then go out and buy things like, refrigerators and toasters, items that will use electricity. So it will encourage consumption, which will encourage the economy to get going. The TSA, the SEC, those would be reform. Anything designed to regulate the stock market or banking to prevent fraud is designed to prevent it from happening again in the future, which means it's a reform-based act. The WPA is relief, jobs. This is the focus of the WPA, particularly for artists, historians, construction workers, women, young people. NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, or also known as the Wagner Act. That's reform. By protecting unions and collective bargaining, it will make it better for working class people economically. They will have more work protection, they will have better wages, and that means they'll be able to spend money, which will get the economy going. FLSA is reform. Regulating minimum wages and maximum hours, ending child labor is designed to protect working class people. They will have more money. They will then go out and buy things, which will get the economy going. And Social Security, that's also reform, protecting the elderly by taking money out of their paychecks and storing it away for the future. Will mean that in the future, they will be less likely to be hurt in an economic downturn. So it ensures them against unemployment. All of these acts you can look at as examples of the ways in which the New Deal became a patchwork of solutions to the Great Depression, fixing the problems that caused Americans to suffer, reforming the economy so that these problems won't cause a depression in the future, and then for the temporary moment, helping people with jobs so they don't starve to death. And they also psychologically feel better by having something to do. FDR wins re-election, so 2 terms he will have at least. And the second New Deal is much more radical. It will include some of the programs we just reviewed in the chart. These more radical solutions are an indication of people on the left pushing FDR towards more fixes for the problems Americans face. More relief programs to provide more jobs and bigger budgets for those relief programs. Greater regulation of capitalism in the second New Deal, so more and more laws to reform and fix the economy so we don't have future depressions. And a core idea, we kind of saw glimpses of it filling out the chart, is that if the government can support consumers, that if it can increase the buying power of consumers by protecting their wages or giving them electricity, then it will help those at the bottom. It will support those who are, weakest in the economic system, and if they're supported, then they will buy products. And when they consume, when they buy, they keep the economy going. And this makes a lot of sense. Consider, for example, the robber baron. A robber baron may have 892 times the wealth of the people at the bottom, but he can't eat 892 times more food. So it's better, according to the New Deal logic, to support those folks at the bottom because they will eat more. They will rent homes. They will spend on consumer products. The robber baron can buy all the toasters that he wants, but he's not going to. He probably will have one toaster in each of his mansions. So the New Deal's thinking about supporting the folks at the bottom is about increasing the buying power of consumers so that they're better able to protect themselves and compete and be involved in the economy so that the economy will grow and be stronger. The other thing that we're going to see in the second New Deal is a really big shift. You've been asking all year when this happens. When do the parties flip? When do the parties trade their ideas? Well, that starts in the New Deal. 1936 is at least my date that I count for the party shift beginning. And I want to say the shift is a process. It's not an event. So don't think that overnight the party said, hey, you want my label? Yeah, I'll take your label. You take my label. This is going to take time. And developments between now and about 1968 will help make those sides shift their ideas and their labels. So, how does this happen? FDR and the Democrats' support for help for the working class and many of the poor people bring those folks together into the New Deal coalition. FDR's support for programs to help African Americans, for working class people and laboring people, bring these people into the Democratic Party who say, I'm voting for the party that helps me, who does something for me. And it's pretty big for African Americans because you consider they had voted Republican since the end of the Civil War. That's the party of Lincoln. That's the party of emancipation. 1936, African Americans vote Democrat more than they vote Republican. They are abandoning the party of emancipation in favor of the party that is actually doing something for them. So the Northern Democrats start sort of shifting their thinking here and becoming the party of federal power, the party of helping these various groups in the economy, the party of reaching out to this big tent of differing interests and working class people and African American people to bring them together as the federal government looks after their needs and actually does something for them. The Republicans will soon become associated with the party of the South, take some time, as well as they'll remain the party of big business and the party of supporting the capitalist interests and not necessarily the interests of the working class. You can see Roosevelt pretty handily won the election, actually better than his previous, the 1932 election. He won 57% of the popular vote. Now he's got 61%. So he's quite popular. Much of the legislation of the Second New Deal is iconic in American history because it so dramatically changes the trajectory of the Democratic Party and the federal government. Things like Social Security, which we still have today, to protect the elderly and the disabled in the event of something happening to them, to give them insurance for their old age, something to live on. The National Labor Relations Act, still operating today, protecting unions, forcing employers to bargain with unions, and making it possible for unions to actually flex their working class muscle in ways that had not been true except under the progressives for a short time. The Works Progress Administration, probably the biggest in terms of monetary spending, of the relief programs of the New Deal. Also, I think one of my favorites because of the spending on the arts. Starving Americans in the Great Depression also included musicians, it included writers, it included painters, photographers, historians, it included lots of people who also needed to find work, and the WPA paid for that. One of the most famous things they did was they created guidebooks for every state, which were tours of the state so that you could go travel and see the sights. And the one for Ohio does include Bexley, though the opening of the Bexley section says that Bexley has pretentious homes. So that's how the WPA writer saw us. Labor union membership dramatically goes up. Remember, it declined during the 20s as unions were driven out as un-American and unacceptable by the campaign of the American Plan and welfare capitalism. Union membership goes up pretty dramatically as propaganda and the government says, we want you to join a union. We want you to protect working people's rights. And here's just a listing of some of the WPA projects. You can see so many things. We're not just, building schools, sewers, beaches, playgrounds, parks, sculpture, medical and healthcare clinics, dental clinics, catalogs of libraries and museums. One of the things the WPA did is they went and cataloged all of the historical records in every county in the United States. So there's a very long typed list of what historical records are available and where they're stored. All of this is designed to give people jobs and to try to help Americans survive until the economy can get going again. Obviously, a very important idea, and we're going to tackle what the legacy of that idea is in our next lecture. I'll see you later.